In a couple of weeks, there will be another 9-stage tournament in The Hague in the Netherlands. I believe registration is still open for this tournament, so if you want to, you should definitely have a look at it. So it's called We Don't Need Another Hero tournament, and well, it's focused on just having one character in your army list. So basically, we don't need any other characters than just your general. So you are allowed to bring an army list that has multiple heroes, but there's some severe penalties for bringing more than one model. So I believe effectively, if you just bring one character, you get a +2 score on your end score for the tournament, which is quite great, but it forces you into some specific armies. So I was looking at the armies that I own. I own vampire counts. Well, for this one, it could still be possible if you make one very strong character, but then, well, if your character dies, then your army is going to crumble to death, so that would be quite risky, I thought. And also, your core really needs some love from some characters or some other support to start working. Then you have my Empire. Well, Empire heavily relies on cheap characters, so playing Empire with just one character is going to be quite a challenge. Dread Elves, yeah, you can pull it off with just one Oracle, probably on a dragon, possibly on a dragon. But I don't feel like I have the models painted now to put down a nice army list with that. So I ended up choosing my Warriors of the Dark Gods. The only thing I had to paint for this army was the Exalted Herald, and as I'm not running a Doom Lord in this army, I would want the Forsworn to be Forsworn with the Damnation upgrade. So I still have to paint a couple of guys for this to replace the Forsworn once they turn into Wretched ones, but I do have the models lying around, so that's going to be fine. Because I still have 2 weeks to do this. So this is the army list that I ended up with. So it's quite similar to the normal army list that I play with Warriors, except for the Chosen that are in the list now. So normally I don't play with these, but instead fill it up with characters. And also, I didn't have any points anymore to upgrade the Helmor with some portals, so I just wanted to see how a Helmor performs when it just doesn't have any portals at the start of the game. So then to my opponent's list, it's Highborn Elves. He also just features one character. So I looked at the list and I was like, oh my god, this is a lot of stuff that he's bringing on the table. Which is a consequence of not having a very expensive character. And he also said that he focused on just bringing a lot of pieces on the table. So it's a bit of an interesting list. You have some very far-reaching units in terms of charge distance in the Knights of Rhyma, the Reaver Chariots, and also the Lion Chariots to some extent. Backed up with the Sea Guard that can shoot, the Queen's Guard that can shoot, and the Grey Watchers. So you have some mild shooting. Trying to drag the opponent in. I think maybe the list could do better with a couple of bolt throwers in there, because right now there is a little bit of pressure for your opponent to come towards you, but well, maybe I'm just also not the suitable army to face for him. But I wasn't really bothered by the shooting that he put on me. So maybe that's solvable in a way of putting sky sloops or bolt throwers on the table. But I must say the Elven bolt throwers at 180 points, they are expensive for what they do, I find, because the maximum you can get is 6 wounds out of them. If you compare it to some other choices in some other books, yes, they are quite reliable in their damage output, but yeah, they are only doing, in the end, something like 3 wounds or so to a unit, if you're lucky. Here's a couple of army pictures of the Warriors of the Dark Gods with the recently painted Exalted Herald, and also the army of my opponent, the Highborn Elves, and as you can see, it's quite a lot. So for magic, I only have the Exalted Herald, which is a wizard adept with 3 spells. He always has access to Rod of God, and depending on the manifestations he takes, he can take different spells. So on him I took for this round Sorcerer, the Sorcerer upgrade, so that he gets Veilwalker. and the upgrade for D6 Stomp, Stubborn and Tall. So in the end I ended up with Rod of God, Pentagram of Pain and the Grave Calls. I believe maybe that I took too high casting values for the spells because, well, basically between Rod of God and the Grave Calls, you already use up all your dice most of the times. My opponent, he has Cosmology, Honest Mage, and he took the spells that you can see in the picture here. And with the Magical Heirloom, he also has the Hereditary of the High Elves, the Favor of Maladis. And then we go into deployment. So we're playing Marching Columns and Capture the Flags, which is the first scenario of the tournament. My opponent chose stable sides, so I then get the decision of which terrain piece to turn into a ruins. So I turned the forest that was in the middle of the field into a ruins, and then it's for my decision on who goes first, and I decide to go first myself because with my Exalted Herald I also have the Rod of God spell, and I generally want to just push my opponent out of his table side, because, well, once your opponent plays with so many units as he does, I find it quite advantageous to just put the pressure on early, so that if he wants to flee, he's gonna more likely flee off the table. And you can only achieve that, or well, it really helps if you put some pressure on early, so that your opponent cannot move up as fast as he normally would be able to. So yeah, I am struggling a little bit with the ruins on my side of the table, and yeah, for the marching columns, I already expected my opponent to just bundle up on the top right, basically, because on the top left has this piece of water. And then on the hill I was expecting some chariots, mostly the big chariot unit, because they get the reroll for the charge. And basically that's also what happens. So I could also have crowded a little bit more the ruins on my side and the place to the right of the ruins, but I did expect his shooting to end up in the corner on the top right. So I didn't really want to give him a lot of choice in targets right there. And in the end, yeah, I think my deployment worked out quite fine. So I decided to drop at some point to get the first turn. And yeah, what you can see is that the Chosen there lined up to go into the ruins, and the Exalted. I find it difficult still to play with the Exalted Herald, just because this is the first time that I play with him. And yeah, getting the fly is really nice, just for the mobility of the model. But I think it's more a solution for if you don't really know yet how to play with the model. Because if you know where it has to be on consecutive turns, you actually know where you have to deploy him, for example. So this is how the deployment turns out to be, and my opponent encountered the problem that he had just too much stuff to be able to go into one corner of the field, basically, whilst that was what he ideally would have wanted to do. Yeah, the one thing I should mention is that, as you can see, the Forsworn have been deployed in a 1-by-3 formation. With Damnation, this is not allowed, which I only discovered after the game, because they're only allowed to have more files than ranks. But yeah, it's good to have some practice games, right? Okay, so let's get into turn 1. So you can see me push up the Forsworn quite aggressively towards his lines. This is because if he goes in with the chariots, he's going to inflict some wounds, and then there will be some model left. They will turn into wretched ones, and they'll be unbreakable. So it's just an anvil, a really good anvil in that respect. And then the rest of the list can only move up cautiously with these chariots on the hill, because if they charge me, I'm gonna lose a beat. So possibly I should have put the Chimera more towards the chariots, so that I could charge it next turn, just to draw out his charge with the chariot. Yeah, I should have done that. Because the chariots, they are nasty once if they charge, and they're nasty twice if they get to charge again. But as long as they're not charging, it's not too bad. So basically, you just I think it's kind of like a wrecking team where you just have to sacrifice one of your models to or one of your units that can strike hard enough against the chariots to really push them to get them out of your opponent's list. So I was quite happy with the matchup because I have the Rod of God, so that forces my opponent to not bundle up too much. The only thing is that he has a couple of far-reaching pieces in his list. So he has the Knights of Rima, he has the Chariots, and also the Lion Chariots. And that's suboptimal for me. Like if it had been a full infantry list, I would have been much more confident in getting to his lines. But on the other hand, like this, yeah, for example, the Knights of Rima, they are very hard hitting on the charge, but they're only 5 wounds with a 2+ armor save, so that is still quite manageable. The only thing I am discovering in this building is right now I have the Wasteland Torch on the Chosen. And well, this is a bad matchup with regards to that, because the Dragon Princes, they have Fireborn. So my opponent can just slam the Dragon Princes in the Chosen and not worry too much about it, because I have paired weapons, so strength 4. So my opponent is left with a 3+ armor save and a 2+ ward save. So as you can see, we already went over to my opponent's turn 1, and he moves back the chariots on the hill, and he charged my Chimera in the field. So the better setup for me would have been to have the Chimera on the left of or on the right side of the ruins in the middle, to the left of the Forsworn, so that they would threaten the Reaver chariots but be out of reach of the Lion chariot. But in this case, I am able to draw out the Lion chariot, and well, my opponent is probably going to kill the Chimera, but then he has the choice of overrunning into the Warrior chariot, where I have a counter charge with the Giant, and he has to take the dangerous terrain test for going into the ruins. Or he can decide to stick where he is and take some charges. So yeah, removing a Lion chariot from the field is not too bad, I would say. So he does get the charge, so he can put some impact hits on my Warrior chariot, and he can attack with his riders. But then, as we go to my turn, yeah, he did cast +1 strength and AP on the Lion chariot also, so possibly I should have tried to dispel that. And as we go to my turn, I am looking at charges, and well, the Forsworn are not close enough for any charges. So the only charge I have is the counter charge with the Giant into the flank of the Lion chariot. And the Forsworn, they just continue doing their duty, trying to keep the Reaver chariots and the warriors, the citizen spears, in their front. I was a bit doubtful whether I could handle both a spear unit and the chariots, and I don't think I could, because the 20 attacks from the spears, yeah, they hit on 2s, they wound on 5, so that's like 6 wounds. With AP1 is 3 wounds extra. If you add in a couple of chariots, then my opponent might be able to just go through the Forsworn. But I could have angled them in a specific way, or another way, moved them up more towards my opponent's chariots. But on the other hand, I was of the opinion that time was actually on my side, because my magic output is quite a bit stronger than my opponent's. So the Exalted Herald on the left, he goes behind the wall, so that my opponent with any charges, he is out line of sight of the Lion Chariot, so with the Knights of Rima he could charge my Exalted Herald, but he's gonna hit on a natural 4+ with lightning reflexes and -1 to it from the wall. That stays a 4+. So if he would still have his full unit of knights after I strike, because I strike first actually, if he would still have his full units of knights, it would be 8 attacks that result in 4 hits. That would result in 3 wounds, and then I have a 4+ ward save left. And yeah, I would be able to stick on my stubborn. So what actually happens in the magic phase is that my Exalted Herald, well, he has the Grave Calls and he has Rod of God, so he casts first the Grave Calls onto the Rima Knight. My opponent has to let it go through, or yeah, has to let it go through, because otherwise I get the Rod of God, which is definitely not good for him. So he lets it through, and I get 11 hits or something, and I just instantly kill the Knights of Rima, which is a bit, well, more than I had expected to do. Which also in turn panics the Lion Chariot. So now in one spell the entire flank has been mopped up, or at least pushed out of action. And yeah, with the Lion Chariot on the right, close to the ruins, my opponent, the impact hits, they go onto the Warrior Chariot and they don't really do a lot. And then, yeah, for the rest, I believe my opponent has 3 wounds onto the Giant. I could have decided to angle my Giant differently, but then I would have given my opponent a charge for the Reaver Chariots on 12, so being within 21 inches. I didn't really want to do that, so currently the only target my opponent had was the Forsworn, because he also can't get to the Warrior Chariot behind the Forsworn because he cannot make the wheel. Yeah, and then yeah, it's my opponent's turn. My opponent doesn't charge into anything. He still backs off, and his mild shooting is well, he is trying to whittle me down, but he's not very effective at that, because well, the armor save and the toughness of the units really make it hard for my opponent to get any wounds through. So yeah, this turn he also started to move up on the right with his Swordmasters. And I think this is something he should have done the previous turn already. Because, well, he has 2 units of Swordmasters, he has the Rima Knights, and I can just, I currently just locked him down with 1 Chimera. And truth be told, if the Chimera charges into the Swordmasters, they are gonna strike first. They hit on 2+, wound on 4+ with 8 attacks. And I have a 6+ armor save left, so there's quite a chance. Well, it's either he's gonna kill me or he's not gonna kill me, but I think it's around the 50-50. So then the Chimera gets to strike, and he's gonna yeah, kill also 3, maybe 4 Swordmasters. So it's gonna be quite an even fight. So I might be able to remove one of the units of Swordmasters with a little bit of luck on either side. We might actually break. But for me, a lockdown like that is good, because I have 3 units of my opponent that I'm locking down, whilst my opponent is feeling locked down by just 1 of my units. And of course there's the Warrior Chariot in the ruins, but it was already quite occupied with the Lion Chariot. But on the other hand, if my opponent went for it fully on the right flank, he might have given the Warrior Chariot a charge. But yeah, then the Warrior Chariot would have ended up on the right. Probably he would have had to overrun off the field, and my opponent could have set up a counter charge with the Knights of Rima. Yeah, so what else? My Forsworn tried to make a long charge into the chariots on the hill, whilst at the same time the Warrior Chariot tried to charge into the Spear Elves. And I did it like this because if I had a field charge with a Forsworn, I would only advance a little bit, end up in front of the spear of the Citizen Spears. And if I did make in the charge with the Forsworn, I would be very happy. And then I would still be kind of confident that the Warrior Chariot would still be able to manage against the Citizen Spears, or at least for a couple of rounds. So I thought it was kind of a win-win situation. In the end, the Forsworn did not manage to charge into the chariots, which was a bit of a bummer, of course, but it was a charge on a 10 or an 11. And the warrior chariot did manage to get into the citizen spears. So the one bad thing is that my opponent can now charge into the Forsworn with his chariot and end up in the overrun in the warrior chariot. So I probably just totally misplaced my portals also. So you can see one portal on the right of the ruins. You can see one portal on all the way on the right of the field, below the wall, above the actual field. And now you can see the third portal on the top left. Yeah, my opponent is really bunkering up, so the portals are not that useful also, and I'm a little bit struggling with the range of the Helmor here. So ideally I would have had a portal all the way in the top corner to the left of the line chariot, just to be able to mop up his flank from the left, because there's also no unit of Knights of Rima anymore there. So then into my opponent's turn, he counter charges, or well, he charges my Forsworn with his chariots, and otherwise he's still playing a very defensive, passive game, where he's just trying to keep me away from his army basically, and just whittle me down with some light shooting. So I feel that in this list that he built, the shooting is a bit too light to be able to do this. But maybe that's my personal opinion. Maybe against some armies it is sufficient. But yeah, my models don't really care about this amount of shooting. So what else is happening? So on the right, my opponent forces me into a decision with his swordmasters. And I would, yeah, this is the situation that I already spoke about. If I charge in with my warrior chariot onto the swordmasters, he will probably stay there. I get an overrun into the nothingness. I get counter charges charged by the Knights of Rima, and I lose my chariot. So the alternative that I do see here is a charge onto his Sea Guard block, which is a charge on a 10. So I have Swift Stride, so it's an okay charge. So at the same time I could use my Chimera to cancel out my opponent's Swordmasters. And then we go into Magic. So the one spell that I do want to dispel is the +1 Strength onto the Chariots, because that is quite a strong spell for a model such as a Chariot, and especially in a Chariot unit. And the Favor of Mlades is also always a very important one to keep an eye on. So actually, I believe my opponent gets +1 to hit on his Sea Guard through, which is fine by me. And then we go into shooting. He puts, with the Grey Watches, actually a wound or two on my Exalted Herald. So in the end, over the entire game, I believe he puts 2 wounds on my Exalted Herald, just with the Grey Watches. Yeah, and then we go into combat. He very quickly removes the Forsworn from the field. He overruns into the chariot. He removes the chariot, and then he just he stays there. I think he didn't go for the overrun just because of the ruins, because then you're testing with 12 dice on a 2+, so you would lose 4 wounds at least. And whilst you would get some impact hits, yeah, you're also going to lose the chariot unit, and I believe he was trying to still keep it in his army. So my turn, I charge with the Chosen against the chariots. I still had 1 warrior also left between the. Yeah, he killed with an Unerring Strike. He killed like 6 warriors or so, and then with the shooting 3 more. So I still have 1 warrior left between the warrior chariot of mine and the other unit of warriors. So I have a couple of charges that I can make, and at that point it becomes very difficult for your opponent to keep his chariot safe. So the first roll he made for the flee roll for the Chosen was an 8, I believe. Had it been lower, I could have charged probably with the warriors, I think, to just force him through his citizen spears, his eagles, his everything there. And I don't remember if there was sufficient space behind the eagles. Alternatively, right now I could charge him with the Exalted Herald, and then he would go all the way through his Sea Guard, and there would be sufficient space actually to put the chariots behind there. So possibly also behind the eagles actually. But he was within 1 inch of the Grey Watchers back there, so he had to continue, so he went off the board. Had he rolled higher, then I could have charged him with my warrior chariot and then forced him off the board like that, ideally. And you can try to measure this out very carefully, but it's really difficult to get such a big unit to go through your own lines and end up at any angle that your opponent can charge, end up in the right way. So other things I do during my turn, one of the stupid things I do is to charge actually the Chimera into the Swordmasters. So I was tempted by the fact that I could possibly just beat them in combat. So my warrior chariot had a failed charge onto his Sea Guard, and then I decided to charge in the Chimera. So I could also just have used the Chimera to chaff my opponent up and save my warrior chariot in the process, but I didn't do that, and I also moved up the Helmor for no obvious reason, so that was also kind of unnecessary. But I believe I was just... Oh no, the reason that I moved up the Helmor was that while we are still playing the capture the flag scenario, I still had one warrior, the champion left of my warrior unit that had been decimated. So I wanted to protect it from my opponent's shooting by putting it behind the Helmor, and for this the Helmor had to move up because I didn't want to risk the ruins dangerous terrain test. Otherwise the giant is, well, he fled at some point from the river chariot charge. He's still fleeing. And then my opponent, yeah, he kills the Chimera in combat. He gets the charge onto my warrior chariot, which I could have prevented just by proper Chimera placement. So that was a bit of a bummer, for sure. Yeah. Yeah, and that's what the board looks like now. So my opponent chaffs me up with the eagles, which is what you would expect at this point. And I believe, yeah, this turn, in my turn, I got off Rod of God, and I put it, you can see it below the wall on the top right. There's a magic card with a dice on it. The dice indicates the exact location of the Rod of God. So you can see my opponent very quickly just trying to get the hell away from this point of the table. And I must say, I would not expect such an infantry army to be able to move away from such a place that quickly. But you are talking about some elves, some very small units. So the skirmishers, they obviously can move away quite quickly. The swordmasters are only 1 deep, so they can make the distance quite big quite quickly. And it's just the Sea Guard that's kind of trapped within the radius of the Rod of God. Yeah, and then for the rest, my opponent's magic, I don't actually remember what he cast again. The +1 to hit on his Sea Guard, which I didn't really care about. He didn't have a lot of targets for an Unerring Strike, I believe, or I dispelled it. Yeah, I felt like an Unerring Strike. No, it's not an Unerring Strike. The Ice and Fire, actually, I think. The one, yeah. He has one ranged spell. I just dispelled that one all the time. Or I try to. Yeah, so in combat my opponent manages to knock out the warrior chariot, and like how it has been placed. My opponent is able to overrun into my helm also. Yeah, that was kind of a misplay by me for sure with the camera on the right. So probably the solution would have been to put the camera on the side of the Swordmasters where the Knights of Rhyma could not make the charge into the warrior chariot anymore. And I wouldn't know if that was going to be exactly possible, but well, it might have been. So for next time I should remember that in case I need some chaff, I really have to use the chimeras to act as chaff. And that they serve like that a way better purpose than to try and get some mileage out of them. Or I should increase the amount of chaff I have in the list, but I feel like it's with warriors it's fine to not have that big amount of chaff, but it's gonna cost you a unit from time to time. So you could say that it looks quite dire for for me right now. So, well, I have my warriors still and my chosen who are trying to still get a lot of mileage out of their points. The Helmo is probably gonna die, and yeah, in combat, actually my warriors are able to overrun into the Swordmasters of my opponent. And the chosen, well, I do decimate my opponent's Great Eagles, so I could have reformed. I tried to go for the overrun into the Knights of Rhyma, but I don't make it. And then when the Helmor gets killed off by the Knights of Rhyma, all the portals are gonna explode. And the portals exploding is not a too bad thing for me, because I hit my opponent's Queen, not the Queen's Guard, the Sea Guard, and the Swordmasters, whilst me myself, only the Chosen are being hit, and the Warriors, I believe. Also, by the way, the Rod of God went off, and it did kill one unit of Swordmasters, half a unit of Grey Watchers, and a couple of Sea Guard. So that was nice. But then my opponent's turn, he's able to charge my Chosen and also my Warriors in a very bad way. So my Chosen have been charged by the Knights of Rhyma in the front and the Citizen Spears in the rear. And the Warriors have been charged by the Swordmasters and the Sea Guard. So what I was currently thinking was like, yeah, okay, the Warriors on the top, they might be able to just stick around. Because it's only 3 Swordmasters, I believe, that there were. After the portal had killed off a couple. So if I have greed, so I can just stick with my spiked shields, and I can still make quite a lot of saves, and it's gonna be fine. And then my opponent went it down. So my opponent killed before I could strike. I believe something. Well, we can see it here. He killed 6 warriors, which is too high of a number for me to be able to stick. And in the end, I only managed to do 1 wound back or something. Whilst I would have expected to at least be able to kill the Swordmasters. And yeah, as a consequence, my opponent he gets the Swordmasters also in the Chosen. And yeah, that's not a very beneficial situation for me. So if you look at the board now, it's just Chosen being flanked, rear charged, and also with a unit with Fireborn, so I cannot touch this unit at all. However, luckily my opponent charged in Citizen Spears on the rear. My Chosen have paired weapons, so I have 4 attacks per model. I am standing 6 wide, I believe. So 6 wide times 4 is 24 attacks, champion is 25 attacks onto the Citizen Spears. I managed to do 10 wounds on them. And actually in terms of combat resolution, I believe I even win this No, I lose this combat. But it's a combat that I lose on with a -3, so I stick on a 6. And I make the 6 with the reroll. So the top position with the warriors I didn't make it, and then the bottom location with the chosen I did make it. So yeah, I would say it quite kind of evens up. So this is not an especially lucky situation, I would say. It's just that my opponent shouldn't have charged Citizen Spears into the rear of the Chosen, especially as the Knights of Rima were Dragonborn, Fireborn, Dragonborn maybe also, I don't know. Yeah, and then the next round the Chosen are gonna go to town onto the Rima Knights. Yeah, and the Rima Knights, they don't have any damage output anymore, so yeah, this is gonna end in a good way for me. So the Exalted Herald, he just moved up away from the Lion Chariot of my opponent that's still alive in the water on the top right, just because I didn't want to risk it. And I wanted to cast some magic onto my opponent's Sea Guard to try and kill off his general, because you get some extra bonus points for that. And then the Chosen actually end up in the Sea Guard of my opponent. So at tournaments I should be a little bit more careful about the placement of this Exalted Herald to allow for the overrun into the Sea Guard, but then again, this was already at the end of the battle after a full day of work and then quite late in the evening. So I do excuse myself for making this very small misplay. But in the end, we still end up into the Sea Guard of my opponent, and in the ensuing magic phase, I believe I still cast Rod of God. I don't remember. Maybe I cast Rod of God. I don't know. But this is the end of the game. So I have my Exalted Herald left on my Chosen, and my opponent has two Knights of Rima that rallied, 2 Great Watchers, 5 Queen's Guard, a Lion Chariot, and the Citizen Spears on the top left. And I would say that, well, it went quite alright. We both made quite a lot of mistakes. So for me, the most important mistakes, the most important mistake was the one with the Chimera on the right, and then the other was the Chimera in the middle at the start of the game, where I should have just pushed my opponent a bit more to draw him out. So if he would have charged me with some Citizen Spears, I could have set up for a counter charge with one of my units. And yeah, I could have also just gone more over the flanks, some more over the ruins. But then again, it was at the start of the game contested by the Knights of Rima of my opponent on the top left. So that's it for this time. I hope you enjoyed it, and see you the next time.